Nice bit of driving, Mrs. Peel.
Time for finesse, for gentle persuasion.
There is a legend that has followed one of British television's most stylish creations for decades, a whisper among classic TV collectors and archive hunters that a single episode of The Avengers was so unsettling, so far outside the show's usual playful tone, that it was quietly pulled and never properly shown again. Whether that story is fact, exaggeration, or a bit of both, it has become part of the folklore surrounding a series that spent most of the 1960s redefining what a spy show, and a leading lady, could be. To understand why that legend took hold so easily, we have to go back to where the whole strange, brilliant experiment began. The Avengers did not arrive on British screens as a finished vision. It began almost by accident, patched together from the wreckage of another program. In the late 1950s, ITV had a medical drama called Police Surgeon, starring a young actor named Ian Hendry. The show was cancelled after a single run, but its producers weren't ready to let go of Hendry, and a Canadian-born executive named Sidney Newman, a man with a taste for unconventional television, decided to build something new around him. What Newman and his team landed on in January of 1961 was a crime drama about a doctor named David Keel, whose fiancée is murdered, pulling him into the orbit of a mysterious, unreadable government operative called John Steed, played by Patrick Macnee. In these earliest episodes, Steed was nothing like the character audiences would come to adore. He wore a plain trench coat, moved through the shadows, and rarely smiled. He was a tool of the plot more than the star of it. Keel was the hero, Steed was his cryptic ally. Then, within a year, the show's foundation collapsed. Ian Hendry left over a contract disagreement, and rather than replace him with another version of the same character, the production made a decision that would define the series for the next 8 years. They let Steed become the lead. Out went the trench coat. In came the tailored three-piece suits, the bowler hat, the rolled umbrella that could double as a weapon, and a dry, unbothered wit that made him feel less like a spy and more like an aristocrat who happened to work in intelligence. It was a small wardrobe change on paper, but it transformed the entire show's identity. With no obvious replacement lead, the producers tried something that had barely been attempted on British television before. They gave Steed a female partner who was not a secretary, not a love interest waiting to be rescued, and not comic relief. Honor Blackman arrived in 1962 as Dr. Kathy Gale, an anthropologist fluent in judo, dressed in leather rather than skirts and blouses, who could handle a physical confrontation as capably as Steed himself. Audiences had simply never seen a woman occupy that space on screen before, and the chemistry between Blackman and Macnee, teasing, respectful, entirely without condescension, became the show's real engine. Blackman's run was short. She left in 1964 to play Pussy Galore opposite Sean Connery in Goldfinger, a role that would make her one of the most recognized Bond women of the decade. Her departure could easily have sunk the format that Kathy Gale had established, but instead it opened the door to the partnership most people now associate with the series entirely, Diana Rigg as Emma Peel. Rigg's arrival in 1965 pushed the show into a different register altogether. Emma Peel was younger, sharper, dressed in the mod futuristic fashions that defined swinging London, and every bit Steed's intellectual equal. The series around her grew stranger too. Episodes built around underground cults, killer robots, mind control, and villains who wouldn't have looked out of place in a comic book. It was a strange cocktail of spy thriller, science fiction, and dry English comedy, and somehow it worked. Rigg, trained on the classical stage, insisted from the start that Peel be written as a partner rather than a decoration, and she pushed back hard whenever scripts leaned toward making her character a damsel or an ornament. That insistence shaped Peel into one of the earliest genuine action heroines on British television, years before the term would become common. It also led to one of the more uncomfortable stories from behind the scenes. Rigg discovered partway through her run that she was being paid significantly less than Macnee, despite carrying equal billing and, by many accounts, more of the show's international appeal. She pushed for a renegotiated contract and got one, but the dispute left a mark. By 1968, worn down by the fight and ready for new challenges, she chose to leave the series, a decision that would prove far more costly to the show than anyone at the time seemed to anticipate. None of this transformation happened smoothly. Behind the crisp editing and playful dialogue, The Avengers was a production constantly negotiating its own identity. Writers disagreed over how far to push the surrealism. Some wanted stranger, more speculative storylines full of secret societies and outlandish inventions, while others wanted to preserve the sharper, more grounded banter that had defined the Steed-Gale years. That tug-of-war slowed scripts down and occasionally showed up on screen as tonal whiplash, an episode of witty espionage followed by one that veered into something closer to fantasy. There were personal frictions too, most of them minor by the standards of any long-running production, but persistent. Some accounts from the set suggest Honor Blackman found McNee's constant joking wearisome during long shooting days. With Rig, the tension wasn't personal so much as structural. McNee had carried the show as its sole constant since 1961, and Emma Peel's enormous popularity meant the spotlight was no longer his alone. By most later accounts, both actors handled the shift with professionalism, and McNee spoke warmly of Rig for the rest of his life, but the adjustment was real at the time. When Rig departed in 1968, the producers cast Linda Thorson as Tara King, deliberately choosing someone younger and softer than Peel's polished sophistication. Thorson worked hard in the role, but she was stepping into a partnership the audience had already fallen in love with, and the spark that had defined Steed's pairings with Blackman and Rig never quite reignited. Ratings, which had already been sliding, continued to slip. Regulators in Britain were tightening their scrutiny of violence on television at the same time American broadcasters were growing more cautious about content that might provoke complaints. The show that had once felt fearless now felt uncertain of what it was allowed to be. It is against this backdrop of declining confidence that the legend of the banned scene took root. As the story is usually told among fans and collectors, a late-run episode veered into territory darker than anything the series had attempted before, something closer to genuine psychological menace than the campy, cartoonish violence audiences expected from the Avengers. According to this account, the material unsettled executives enough that the episode was pulled before wide broadcast, leaving only fragments, rumors, and second-hand descriptions behind. It's worth being honest about how much of this can actually be verified. No complete, confirmed print of a banned episode has ever surfaced with documented broadcasting records to match the legend precisely, and much of what circulates is second-hand recollection rather than hard archival proof. What is true is that British broadcasting standards genuinely were tightening in the late 1960s, that advertisers genuinely were growing more cautious about controversial content, and that a show already wobbling in the ratings would have been especially vulnerable to any scandal, real or exaggerated. Whether one specific episode was truly suppressed, or whether the story grew out of ordinary content disputes that later ballooned into myth, the uncertainty itself became part of the show's mystique. A gap in the historical record, left unfilled for long enough, tends to get filled with speculation instead. What isn't speculation is the environment the rumor grew out of. The series' American home, ABC, was already nervous about the show's shifting tone and its uncertain identity following Rig's exit. A controversy, confirmed or not, landing at that exact moment would have given network executives one more reason to hesitate, at a time when they were already looking for reasons to let the show go. By 1969, the pressures had piled up beyond what any single fix could repair. The chemistry between Thorson and McNee, while professional, never matched what audiences remembered from the Blackman and Rig years. Competing shows were experimenting with grittier, more contemporary spy storytelling, making the Avengers' blend of tweed-suited whimsy and surrealism feel, to some viewers, like a relic of an earlier decade. Network interest cooled, advertiser confidence weakened, and the series that had once been sold to more than 90 countries around the world quietly came to an end. It wasn't a dramatic cancellation announcement so much as an exhausted one. The show that had reinvented itself twice, first when McNee's Steed stepped into the spotlight, and again when Emma Peel arrived, simply couldn't find a third reinvention in time. The end of the series didn't end the careers that had made it iconic. Patrick McNee, who had been the one unbroken thread through every era of the show, went on to appear as Sir Godfrey Tibbett alongside Roger Moore in the 1985 Bond film A View to a Kill, lent his distinctive voice to documentary narration for years afterward, and turned up in guest roles on shows like Columbo and Frasier. He never distanced himself from Steed. If anything, he embraced the association for the rest of his life, giving interviews about the show well into his later years. He died in California in 2015 at the age of 93. Honor Blackman's post-Avengers career hardly slowed down after Goldfinger. She worked steadily across film and television for decades, appeared in Jason and the Argonauts, later showed up in Doctor Who and Coronation Street, and remained outspoken about the importance of Kathy Gale as one of television's first genuinely capable female action characters. She died in 2020 at the age of 94. Diana Rigg's career, already accomplished before the Avengers, only grew larger afterward. She played Tracy Bond in On Her Majesty's Secret Service in 1969, still to this day the only woman to ever actually marry James Bond on screen, and built a formidable stage career with the Royal Shakespeare Company, winning a Tony Award in 1994 for her performance in Medea. Decades later, an entirely new generation discovered her as the acid-tongued Lady Olenna Tyrell in Game of Thrones, a role that earned her multiple Emmy nominations. She died in 2020 at the age of 82. Both Blackman and Rigg went on to steady work in the United States, including appearances in Star Trek, The Next Generation and Law & Order, Special Victims Unit, along with a long run in theater and a stint on the soap opera Emmerdale. She has remained proud of her time on the series, even though her era coincided with its most turbulent stretch. In 1976, 7 years after the original series ended, Mackney returned as Steed for the new Avengers, joined by Joanna Lumley as Putty and Gareth Hunt as Gambit. The revival brought faster pacing and a more contemporary edge, but it never quite recapped to Linda Thorson, who inherited one of the hardest acting jobs of the era, following Red the Alchemy of the 60s version, and it folded after 2 seasons. Even so, its existence said something about how much affection remained for the original. What the Avengers actually left behind has very little to do with any single controversial episode, real or rumored. It left behind Kathy Gale and Emma Peel, characters who proved, at a time when British television rarely allowed it, that a woman could be the smartest, most capable person in any given scene without needing rescue. It left behind John Steed's bowler hat and umbrella as shorthand for a very particular kind of English cool. It left behind a template, spy fiction mixed with dry wit, science fiction, and genuine style, that influenced everything from The Professionals to later, more self-aware entries in the espionage genre. The mystery of the lost episode, whatever its true origins, endures precisely because the show itself thrived on mystery, on strange villains, hidden organizations, and plots that never fully explained themselves. In a strange way, the legend fits the series perfectly. A show that spent 8 years blurring the line between playful fantasy and something a little darker finally left behind one more puzzle it never quite solved. Fact or folklore, it's a fitting coda for a series that always seemed to know exactly how much to leave to the imagination.